Welcome to the quick learn today on designing HTML emails using Outlook. My name is Tennille Fincham, and with me I have Susie Johannes. We are two instructors at KUIT, so many of you have probably seen us in open workshops or in previous quick learn sessions. If you have attended quick learn sessions in the past, the format of these sessions is to just show really one topic of interest during the hour presentation. If you guys have questions at all, feel free to post those questions in the chat. And if you're new to Skype for Business, I'll show you how to activate the chat on the next screen. So stay tuned for that. And then many of you probably did see this once I started the recording, but just to verbally say it as well, we are recording today's session, and I will post the recording and get the recording link out to you all in my follow-up email by the end of the week. So as I mentioned, if you're new to Skype for Business, here's just a few tips for getting started. One, it's going to be best for you to maximize your window. You'll get the best viewing results and be able to see my screen as best as possible. We also ask that you mute your microphone while you're not currently speaking. This just helps to cut down on any feedback that may be happening in the background. And as I mentioned, if you need to open up the chat menu, that is found in the chat message icon in the left-hand corner of your screen. And then finally, if you're joining in us through the web app, you may have some additional presentation view options. And so in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you can choose view and select the presentation view. Again, for the web app, if you're joining through there, and just allows you to see the screen a bit more. All right, so let's see what we're going to cover today. Again, we're going to be talking about designing these HTML emails. So at the very beginning here, before we get to the tips, I'm actually going to show you just some examples and talk about what some things are to be able to put into HTML emails, like what are good ideas to do this for. And then we'll be talking about layout tips. So really the key to creating these is using tables within the email message. So we'll talk about adding those and formatting those a bit and getting them to look the way you want for your distribution. Then we'll talk about content tips, so adding in text, adding in images and pictures, logos if you have them. We'll also talk about aligning then these objects and making sure that they're in the correct place. And we'll also talk about creating hyperlinks. Finally, we'll talk about a few tips for distribution, some things to keep in mind when you are distributing these, and then I'll give you some additional tips at the end here to use for designing your emails. All right, so with that, I am going to switch over to showing you some examples, kind of where we're going today, and some other examples of HTML emails. So the first one here, this is what we'll be designing today during the hour session. So just to give you kind of a glimpse of what our final will somewhat look like. We may not get to all the parts, but we'll get to most of these so you can see how to build this in. So good things for HTML emails are those emails such as this. This is like an update email that may go to all people who've previously attended our open workshop sessions and just letting them know what we have available, when they're going to be scheduled, etc. So that's a good communication to send out as part of an HTML email. It helps you to brand it a bit more and give a little bit more pizzazz than just a strictly text-based email. Another good example, here I have the IT newsletter. So another example of things that you could create using the tables within emails. Now, I'm not sure if our IT department, communications department actually uses Outlook to do this. They may use something different, but you could absolutely create a layout that was similar here and insert all of these images and make all the colored text. So another good example of sending to a large audience and a newsletter communication type. All right, and then the last one that I want to show you here, so before every open workshop session, Susie and I send out CU emails or introduction emails, and we started to brand those again, and we created these using the table format. So again, this goes to a larger audience. It's a really good way to keep your communications consistent and add in some branding and identification to your communications. So if you send a lot of stuff to students, faculty, or staff, you may consider creating a template like this in order to be able to send out announcement emails, or like we do these introductory communication emails. All right, so let's get into actually building this example, which, as I mentioned, we're going to be going off of this one here. So this is kind of what we're going for today. So we just want to start out with a new email. You know, I absolutely could go back to Outlook and say new email. The keyboard shortcut for this is actually Control N. And so this will create a new blank email message for me. And then I just want to remove my signature here. So we're just starting out with a completely blank slate here for our email message. Now I mentioned that the key to this really is using tables. So inserting a table within the body of your message. Here we're going to go to Insert, and then there's a table functionality. If you're used to working with these in Word or PowerPoint, same idea here within Outlook, where we can select the number of columns we want to create and the number of rows we want to create. So columns across, horizontally, and rows vertically. Just to point out, it doesn't really matter how many you start out with because we can always make modifications to that later. I generally, just kind of as a general option, I usually like to start out with at least 3 columns because I know I'm going to have, a border, a colored border around my text and stuff. And so I go ahead and just start out with 3 columns. All right, so that's what I'm going to do here. Now, a lot of the messages that I showed you, what we actually had was the message of the email was centered perfectly within the body of the message. And we can do that. The first thing you want to do is make sure that you select your entire table by clicking here in the corner. You get these 4 crosshairs. So we'll click there. That selects the entire table. And then to center it within the body of the message, you'll click on Message. And you'll use your alignment tools here, so the same ones that you would use for text. So I'll use the center, and that will center our content then on our page. All right, so we have it centered, we have our layout started. Now, what I generally start with as the first 2 things that I design are the header and the footer. So if we take a look back at our email message, our header includes basically this yellow bar, this gray information, and then our subheader and heading here of KU Technology Instruction. So that's going to be the first part that I design, and then the second part that I design is usually the footer information, just so that I have a beginning and an end, and then I can modify the middle as I need. So we're going to design those 2 pieces first. All right, so we're going to select the rows or the cells that we want to create as the color. So I'm just going to select these first top 3. That's going to be that yellow band. And then to change the color, it's actually under the Design tab, and then it's under Shading. Now you have these sort of color palettes here. You can also click on more colors and get sort of a hexagon of additional colors, or you can also click on custom, and then that allows you to put in really specific RGB color numbers. So I actually already have some recent ones in here. Just to mention, these are on the KU Colors secondary palette. And so in my follow-up email, I will send you the link as to where to find the RGB color numbers for all the KU colors. So I'll send that in my follow-up. All right, so we've got our yellow bar across the top. The next things we need to start to create are those borders. So here, what I generally do is I'll just adjust, 1. So I'll just kind of pull this over and see about how wide I'd like to create that border. And then if I click into one of those cells and choose layout, then I can see exactly like how wide that is. And so now I can adjust this one to be the same width. So here, and somehow I got it right on. I don't always do that, but you can just go ahead and like type in the number of what the width will be. All right, next up, we're going to start to create the gray bars around. So I'm going to select underneath my yellow bar, come up to design and shading, and select just a light gray. And then I'm going to do the same here. I'm just creating that gray border that goes all the way around my content. Now, if I wanted to adjust the width of columns or the height of rows, I'm sorry, then we can just click and expand down. And again, under layout is where you can find like how high the specific height of your rows. Okay, so now we're on to designing the portion that has our heading and subheading. One thing I want to mention here is that within our design, what we actually have is a shape in one corner, we have a logo in one corner, and then in the center we have our text. So here it's important to kind of create a separate cell for each one of these items to reside, because that's going to make it a lot easier to be able to align them within different places. So it's easier to align this at the bottom corner if it's in its own cell, because that's how alignment is done, is per cell. So here, in order to make this one row, one column into multiple, on the layout tab, there's actually this split cells. So here, if we do split cells, and then the default here is to do number of columns 2, number of rows 1, but for number of columns, I can bump this up to 3 and click OK. And now I have those 3 quadrants to place my shape, my text in the middle, and my logo in the right-hand corner. So I'm going to go ahead and just resize some of these here to about something like this is fine for to start with. The first thing that I'm going to type in here, I'm just going to go ahead and put my heading and subheading. So this is KU technology instruction. The key is spelling everything correctly, which I'm not doing today. So spring 2017, and maybe this is open workshops and quick learn sessions. To format this text, we need to go back to our message tab. And so here, I'm going to highlight this. On that link I'll send you on identity.ku.edu, it has the fonts that are also used at KU. And so one of them that I'm going to use today is the Gill Sans. So Gill Sans, I'm going to bump this up a little bit and maybe make this bold. And then the other one that's a KU font that you can use is Palatino. So I'm going to highlight the subheading here and make this Palatino. And so that's looking pretty good. I might, expand this a bit here. And now I'm ready to insert my logo and also that shape, that triangle shape that's in the corner on this side. So shape first. Here we're going to do insert and shapes. And I actually use the right triangle to design that. So I'm going to choose right triangle. And then you can click and drag to create the size. A good tip here is if you hold down the shift key, then that constrains the proportions of that triangle and truly makes it a right triangle. And then if I want to rotate it, then here I can use the rotate button. And again, if I use the shift key at the same time, then it constrains those rotations. Now, when you are sending this out, with shapes, they're a little bit tricky when you add them because you actually want to anchor them to some text as opposed to being like a free-floating object. That way, when you send it out, it knows kind of where its location is as opposed to floating off somewhere else. So that is actually done under the layout options here. Or actually, sorry, right-click and wrap text. And you'll want to say in line with text here. So it puts it in line with the title at the top and anchors it to that. And then that way it stays in its location. If that is a little bit confusing, it may be best just to stick with images because you don't have to worry about anchoring them in that way. But if you do use shapes, just make sure that you attach it to be in line with the text. All right, so I'm going to format the shape a little bit. Once I click back onto the shape, I get the format tools at the top here. And then that's where I can go in and change my shape fill. So maybe I'll fill it with this blue and not outline it. So that's looking pretty good, pretty close. The next thing we want to enter in and add in is that logo that's within this quadrant. So here we're going to click into that cell, then we're going to choose Insert and Picture. And here I actually have one, it's called Tech Hawk Horizontal White. That's the logo that goes there. I'm going to choose Insert. This one's a little bit tricky because when it was designed, it's designed with white text. And so for me to be able to see it, I actually have to come up to the Format tab. And under Color, you can select kind of some highlight colors to add to it. So I'm just going to select this light gray. And then now my text, instead of white, is that light gray, and you can see it a bit better. Now, as I mentioned, it's not important with images here. They don't float away like shapes do. So really the only thing I need to do with this is that I need to move it and I need to somehow anchor it so that it's in the lower portion of the screen here. So you may be thinking, well, all I need to do is add some returns to the top, but actually there's an easier way to move this to the bottom, and you can do that with the cell alignment tools. So aligning the table in the center that was under the message, because we're talking about the message body of the email. Aligning things within cells, that's under the layout tab because we're talking about the layout and the alignment within a specific cell. So clicked into the cell. Here along the side there are the alignment tools. And this shows a description of where they're going to be located. So for us, I'm going to do an align bottom center. So that's going to move the image to the bottom of that row, and it's going to align it centrally vertically. So we're getting pretty close to our header here. A couple of other things I'm going to do here. I know that I'm going to have this gray border go around all of our cells. So I'm going to go ahead and shade this row below our header in with that gray. So again, that's the Design tab and then Shading. And then I'm going to move on to the footer, and let's take a look at that. So our footer, if you all remember, here's what we're going for. We want it to be across the entire bottom, so we don't want to have that border within there. And then we want our contact information in the far left and some logos in the far right. So this is a little bit different in how we need to lay this out. We need to come to our message. In order to get this exactly right and the way that I did it in the email, what we actually have to do is select all of these cells at the bottom, and instead of splitting them like we did for the header, we're going to come to Layout, and we're going to merge them all together to begin with. So that creates one. Now we can go in and split our cells, but here we can create additional 3 columns that are sort of independent. So I can click OK. And the cool thing about this is that now I can have like this column be wider than what's constrained by my border, so that I can have this column be for my contact information and this column to the side here, again, different size than the border, can be for the images. All right, so next thing here, I need to fill this in with the color. So I'm going to select the cells I just created, click on Design, and I just so happen to have a recent color here. This is called Obsidian. Again, it's in the KU color palette. So now to enter in my text, I'm going to click on that far left quadrant. I'm going to say Contact Us and put in some information. Outlook will recognize when you've entered in an email address if it has the @ symbol, so that automatically creates a clickable hyperlink. I'm going to add in our phone number here, and maybe just one more bit of information. And then maybe I'll also go ahead and expand this out just so that it fits in there. Cool. And then I'm going to enter in those 2 logos. So we have 2 logos that are on top of one another. So here I'm going to choose Insert, Pictures, and they are the Tech Instruction Contact icons. And then I can do an enter, insert, pictures, and the IT logo. And then maybe I'll make this a bit larger. And then maybe I'll center this information as well. So click into the cell where you want to align the information, click on the Layout tab, and choose one of these options. Okay, so I want to stop there. Are there any questions so far as to starting to create these tables, getting text and images aligned, and adding in images? Okay, so it sounds like Susie's been answering your questions. So maybe one question coming up here. So great question. Why didn't I just split the cell at the bottom? The cell at the bottom, this was actually already split. And so here, if we take a look, some of our previous steps here. Yeah, and like Susie just said, you could have split the cells. It's just personal preference of the design. In mine, I didn't want to have, so here's what we started out with, where this was actually already split. If we had moved this in order to allow for those borders to come in, then that would have changed it. We absolutely could have just split this cell into 3 additional columns and gone in that way. And that would have been fine too. And then we could have filled it all in blue. So I mean, either way could have worked, to be honest. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I'm going to keep going then. I just opened up because I made those changes and undid some of those steps. I just opened up a new one here. And so what we had before, it looked like, I'll just go ahead and delete these. So here's where we ended. Essentially, we had our footer done, we had our header done, we had our logo at the top, everything else located here. I did just make one change here in between what we just looked at in this version, and the only change was that I changed this text color to be that obsidian, just to stay in the same color palette. Cool. And then I also just changed some of these colors a bit here too, which I'll show you in just a little bit as well. All right, so the next thing I'm going to show you is entering in hyperlinks. And so what we have on our completed version is we have a series of links at the top here where we have links to our open workshop sessions, links to quick learn sessions, etc. And so to create those links, the first thing we need to do is actually just type in the words that we want to be sort of the vanity plate of the link. And so here I'm just going to type in open workshops, quick learn sessions, and desk side coaching. Also, just a quick note, this line right here, this is actually created by doing a shift backslash, which is the key right above the enter key. So shift and then the key right above enter will create these sort of line text items, which are good sort of barriers in between things like I've done here for these different headings. Okay, then to create our links, you'll want to highlight your text or highlight that text vanity plate that you just put in. And then you can always go to insert and you can say hyperlink, or the keyboard shortcut to that is actually Control K. And then under address is where you'll want to type in the URL that they'll be directed to. So this will be workshops. This one here will be http technology.ku.quicklearn. And then I'll just make up for this one because I can't ever remember it. So we'll just do this one again. Now, if we want to change the way our text looks, so if we want to change the type, if we want to change the color, we can simply just highlight that text, even though it's a URL, and we can make changes under the message tab. So I could make this that obsidian blue again, and maybe I would make this the, I don't know, the Palatino typeface or something like that. Any questions on the hyperlinks?
We had one question about if you can use the app, but I think I have it answered. I'm not quite sure.
Oh yeah, there might be limited options in the mail.ku.edu. Yeah, something you can take a look at, but like Susie said, you may not get all the functionality. So I don't know if you're able to like merge and split cells or if you're just able to create just a real limited table. Cool. All right, well, let's get on then to the content of our page. One thing that I generally like to do as I'm kind of starting to design this out, right now we have in all of the borders of our cells, which is showing, where we have cells split, where we have our columns split, things like that. If you select your entire table here, again, by clicking in the corner, one thing you can do is click on Design and select borders. And if you just hover over no border, then this gives you a nice preview of what your email message will look like. And so a lot of the times when I'm in this design phase, I like to keep the borders on because it's much easier to move and split the cells and see where things are aligning. But then to preview it, I'll just go to borders and no border to see that. All right, so we're going to start to type our content then at the bottom. I'm going to start out with, let's see, I had the um, ready, set, register. And then I'm just going to do enter here, and I'm going to say information on how to register for open workshops. I'm going to leave it at that. I had a lot more text in the previous version, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to leave it at that. One other thing I may want to do is I may want to change these titles of information. So I may want to come to message. I probably would change this to my Gill Sans because that's one of the two fonts I've been working with so far. And then maybe I would change it to one of the colors that I've been using. So maybe this blue or something. So ready, set, register. Now what we have actually within this portion is we have it broken down. Oops. We have it broken down into a list, and I must have closed that. There it is. So here we have kind of a two-column spread with bulleted items. Whenever you're doing this as well, a good idea to split the column so that you can manipulate information in this area independent of information in this area. It just makes it a little bit easier to kind of control what's happening when you want to do a two-column information spread there. Okay, so we're going to enter in that next. So what I actually did is I did an insert, or I'm sorry, layout, insert below. So I created a brand new row at the bottom, and I'll go ahead and shade this to that gray. So a new row, and then this is the row that then I went to layout and split cells so that I can get that two column spread on this example. So then I had my information, oops, so I had, let's see, list one topic, list two topic, and then this was list 2, and this was topic 3, topic 4. You guys get the idea. Now let's say I wanted to copy this title at the top, or I wanted to copy how this body text is looking. A quick way to do that is to highlight the text that you like and then click on this paintbrush icon. It's called the format painter. So it's going to pick up the format of the text that you have selected, and then you can brush it across or select and highlight it across other text. So that's a good tip. Here again, the paintbrush icon picks up the format of the text you have selected, and then you can click and drag that across other text. So I could do the same thing here for my titles so that I'm making sure I'm using the same type of font and colors, etc. And then the last thing for me to do here is I just added in bulleted lists by selecting those topics, clicking on message, and then using the bulleted list option here. So they're looking a little bit wonky, but it's not too bad. And then the next thing that I'd probably want to do here is I would probably want to add another row at the bottom. So I'm going to do layout, insert below. So now I have another row. This is going to be that gray row, that border that goes in between. So I'll shade that, and then I'll insert another one. So layout, insert below. Just to be aware here, I'm going to do another insert below. So the insert of the new row takes on the same format as the row above it. So here I'll just want to make sure that on this one I select and say design, shading, no color. So I have my borders in between my topics, and then this is where my other new topic will go. So at this point, what we are at is this section of our newsletter or update announcement, whatever type of email communication that we're deeming this. What I want to show you on this one is, one, we're going to insert an image, but the other thing we're going to do here is actually make this image a clickable hyperlink. So if I wanted to use this as a way for people to also get to the view and register for courses, you can also make images clickable hyperlinks. So I'm just going to minimize this. I already have this split, but one thing you may want to do if I don't want this to be the same width as the row above it, see how it's using the same split cells? What I may want to do is merge these first. So layout, merge cells, and then split them independently. So split 2, okay. And then I should be able to move these columns independent, so I don't have to constrain on the same width of columns as the row above it. All right, so this is where my image is going to be. I'll click in that cell, choose Insert, Pictures, and here it is, and Insert. So there's my calendar icon. Now to make this a clickable hyperlink, again, we just need to select the image. We can always go to Insert and Hyperlink, but again, the keyboard shortcut for that, for creating hyperlinks, is Control K. And so here then I can just put in that URL where I want them to be directed if they were to click on that image. And then I could always, go ahead and put in my titles here. So let's take a look at what that looks like just as a preview. So we're going to click to select our entire table, choose design, and here we can see what all of that's starting to look like with the no borders. I think that's as far as I'm going to go today on this one because I want to make sure that I have enough time for all of the tips. But the only other portion that we had on this particular email was to enter in some text and then another couple of pictures. So let me show you what this one looks like. This is going to look pretty similar to our one that we've been working on. If we select the whole table, we can come up to design and borders, all borders, and we can kind of start to see the makeup of this particular table. So we can see where images are, where cells are split. Here, as you can see, there's like 3 columns, one to contain the text, another to contain one image with a set of subtext, and another for the third image and a subtext. So those borders are really helpful for being able to see how information is laid out. So we would do the same thing if we were to continue on. We'd create a new row, split it into 3 columns, and then insert our pictures and our text. So any questions on that as far as getting information set up within your tables here? Okay, so not looking like any questions. So let me go over then some distribution tips. So the first one here that I have is to create templates for yourself for reuse. So let's take a look at that. So that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time that you want to create one of these types of communications and send it out. What you'll essentially do is block it out just in the way that we've done here. And maybe this is as far as you would go, where you just have like your heading type that you'd want to use, maybe a couple of images, and then create your headers and your footers. So maybe this is actually as far as you would go with getting your template blocked out. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to hide these borders. So I'm going to choose border, no borders, just so we can kind of see the final output of this. Now to create a template for later use, here you can click on File and Save As. Instead of saving it as the regular Outlook message format, what you're going to want to do is actually choose Outlook Template from the drop-down menu. So Outlook Template here. And then you'll browse to the location where you want to save it. The nice thing about saving it in this way is that it's not just stored in your personal drafts of your Outlook, but you can actually store and save this on a shared drive. So if I did that, both Susie and myself would be able to use that template and send it out as we needed. So I'm just going to save it here is fine, and I'm just going to leave that message format. So save. So now I'm going to go ahead and close this down. Now, once you're ready to send out that email, you'll just browse to the location where you have it saved. Here it is, my quick learn email example 2. I'll double click to open. And now this is ready for me to put in the recipients. I could change the title or the subject of the message and make any updates I needed to the actual text. And I'd probably remove my signature down here at the bottom, but now you're ready to go and you don't have to, like I said, reinvent the wheel and create this and perfect it another time. So templates are a really good use for communications you'll send out often. The next one that I have here for when you're distributing this is to BCC your recipients. This is a good idea because if you have, especially if you're not using like distribution lists, if you just have, a list of 100 people or 1,000 people that you're sending it to, especially if you're on a mobile device, you'll be scrolling for days before you actually get to the content of the message. So BCC your recipients, and then there's not that problem of having to scroll through all the people to whom it was sent before you actually get to the message body. Another one here is to send a test copy to yourself before you distribute this to the masses. Also consider sending a test copy to a colleague. And you're going to want to view this test copy both, in the full version of Outlook. I would probably also view it, and a good idea to view it in the web app version, and a good idea to view it on your mobile device, just so you can see what that's going to look like for a lot of the viewers at KU. And then a bonus one is if you wanted to view it through like Gmail or have a friend view it through Gmail. And then the last one that I have here for distributions is to start with a fresh copy each time that you send this. So let's say after you send your test copy and everything looks perfect, you're not going to want to just say, reply or forward that test copy because that actually starts to degrade the images. And so what you'll want to do is go back to your template and send from your template version as opposed to any test copies that may have been sent. So it looks like maybe a question here. Oh, it's if you hold down the shift key and then press the key above enter. There's like the key above enter, I think is like the backslash. Cool. All right, so start with a fresh copy. Always go from your template when you're sending them out. A couple of things else to keep in mind. One is the mobile version. So one thing that for sure, doesn't work, and you'll see when you do your test copies, but one thing for sure that is sort of strange in mobile versions and within the mail.ku.edu web app is, here what we did for our color is we actually manipulated the color of the table cells, which is how you're going to want to do any color transitions. There's this other option here if you click into the body of an email, and if you do options, there's this option to change the page color, and so that changes like the whole background message color. However, on certain mobile devices and on mail.ku.edu, this background color does not display. So if you're banking on having a dark page color and your type in white, if someone's viewing through mail.ku.edu, they're not going to be able to see any of the text that you have in white because it won't display this background color. So instead, make your color changes to your table only and not to the message background. The other one that I have here as a thing to keep in mind is plain text format. Oops. So we are creating and viewing these emails in what's called HTML format, which allows us to see and access the hyperlinks. We can see the colors, we can see the images, we can see the different font types and colors. But sometimes people will have their email set to receive information in plain text only. And so in that case, they won't receive any of the table formatting or any of the color formatting or something like that. So you may want to just try out when you're testing, if you're curious as to what that looks like, you can always change your email type to receive plain text or to send plain text. So I'm going to start out with just like a new email here. So here it's under the format text. And so here we're at HTML, which gives us all those options, but you can always do a plain text and then send it to yourself after you've chosen plain text and just see what that looks like. Or you can select data and say plain text and continue, and then you can see what that's going to look like in plain text format. So during your testing, you may also consider just taking a look and seeing what that actually looks like in plain text. Okay. And then last things are just some additional tips here. One is what can be helpful because I find sometimes looking at tables just within the body of an email message, sometimes it's a little bit disorienting, and sometimes it's kind of hard to see the final product just looking at these blank cells. So if you're like that too, sketching out your final product can be really helpful. It can also be really helpful because with that, you can start to define where your column and your cell splits are going to be before you start designing. And so it gives you kind of a roadmap of something to go towards. And then the final one here, and I'll send this link in the follow-up email as well, is that the KU color palettes and the fonts, that can all be found at identity.ku.edu. So I actually have that pulled up here. And so you'll click on visual identity. And then towards the right-hand side, there's fonts, and there's also color. So fonts will tell you, the fonts that they typically used. I use the Gill Sans and the Palatino for my particular one. And then the color gives you a primary palette and a secondary palette. And so I use stuff from the secondary palette here. And what's nice is that it gives you like those RGB direct numbers, so you can type those in Outlook when you're designing and get the exact color. All right, last thing I want to show you here, just to give you an idea, this is the sketch that I drew up for our workshop today. And so what I did is I blocked out kind of what I wanted it to look like as a final piece. And then those hashed lines or the dashed lines actually then represents where each of the columns are split and where their rows are split, just so I can start to get a sense of when I would need to split something versus when it's going to stay or when I need to merge items. So this helps me a lot in the design phase before I actually get into Outlook. Okay, so any final questions over anything that we have gone over today? All right, so it's not looking like it. I do just want to mention here, we do provide department training. We also have the open workshops and our other quick learn webinars on workshops.ku.edu. And if you have additional questions, we can meet one-on-one and talk about your design. The upcoming quick learn sessions that we have coming up on March 8th, we have the top 5 CMS questions and solutions. On April 5th, we have mail merge basics for Word and Outlook. On April 19th, we have the basic setup of a My Community team site. And on May 3, we'll be doing an Excel project, and I'll show you step by step as to how to create a fillable financial form within Excel. And finally, I will send this out by the end of the week today. So I'll send you a link to the recording. I'll send a few additional learning resources and that identity.ku.edu link. And if I have any outstanding questions, I'll send answers to those as well. So thank you for your time today. Please let us know if you have any questions now or some come up later. Feel free to email me back. And have a great lunch hour.